chapter of Mark. We're following up a healing story with another healing story. Remember that Mark often couples stories. This isn't one that is sandwiched, but he does kind of link themes together. And so we're in a series of kind of miracle stories, and it'll be bracketed. We'll see that tomorrow. But this one, yesterday Jesus had a strange conversation with a woman and driven a demon out of her young daughter and restored health. Today, Jesus encounters a deaf man. And this, again, Michael, I would say Mark's telling of these stories give us some strange details. Mark has a way of inserting, I think, in many ways, the most question marks into some of the stories he tells. So this one will probably raise an eyebrow or two. Let's take a look at it. Verse 31, then Jesus returned from the region of Tyre and went by the way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears. And he spat and touched his tongue. And then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, to be open. And immediately his ears were open and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, he has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear, and the mute to speak. So here, in some ways, the exact opposite of the story we had seen yesterday. In that story, Jesus doesn't even encounter the person who is affected, and there's no touch. In this story, a far more intimate kind of healing where there's touch, there's kind of manipulation of the senses. He takes him aside, and we have a real contrast here, but the short summary is the same, Michael. Jesus does something that is expected of the Messiah, that is celebrated. You know, we've seen the deaf will hear, the blind will see, those who can't speak will gain voices. These are the kind of things that have always, in the history of the Jewish people, been expected to herald the Messiah. And through Mark's words, Jesus is literally living them out in front of us.
Yeah, Clint, you know, it's been said before, and I definitely don't want to go down a theme that we've talked about, but it's worth noting, this is, to me, a classic example of Mark adding another step of the people being astounded at Jesus' ability. Your talk of the Messiah, I think, is right on. That when we talk about Jesus, we sometimes miss the huge chasm between who Jesus was and who people perceived him to be, especially as we go throughout this book, and all of the other people, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees, the teachers of the law, the experts of that time. Jesus teaches with authority. And once again, we have here, verse 36, the more zealously they proclaimed it, they were astounded beyond measure. Once again, it's just Mark saying people couldn't believe how great Jesus was, and this is sort of another emphasis upon it. But let's not read past some of these details too quickly, Clint. If I am remembering correctly, the last time we heard about the Decapolis was when he cast out the demons and the hogs went off the cliff. That was in the region of the Decapolis, was it not? Either way, this is a story that's happening in Gentile territory. And it should strike us that when he speaks up to heaven and he says, Ephphatha, that's an Aramaic word. So it's this sort of amazing blending between what the people of Israel were expecting and what the Gentile world was not expecting. And when they saw Jesus for who he was, they were astounded beyond measure. They were literally taken aback. They had not imagined someone of this stature. And Mark is just clearly showing us story upon story that Jesus is really more magnanimous than we could have even imagined at the beginning.
Yeah, and just in terms of stories, some connections here. We might remember a couple of, several sessions ago, we had the young girl, Jairus' daughter, and Jesus says to her, Talitha cum, which again is Aramaic. And Jesus most likely, as the disciples all did, spoke Aramaic. And so Mark has this way of leaving the commandments, leaving these sentences in here in their native tongue without translation, and calling to this man to be opened. And Michael, this has gotten a lot of attention, this spitting on the ground or touching the man's tongue, putting his hands in his ears. There's lots of questions through the years about does that mean something? I'm not sure. For me, I think we can get a little too deep into the details. And I think for Mark, the clear point is that Jesus heals him. He takes him away from the crowd, so he's not trying to get attention. In fact, we've seen it over and over again. He's trying to do the exact opposite. And he calls this man to wholeness, to hearing and to speaking. And it may help, and I think we've probably, if we haven't said this explicitly, we've talked about it enough. But in the gospel world, particularly in the gospel stories, there is this inseparable link between one's spiritual condition and one's physical condition. And so we think in chunks. We think of psychological health, we think of physical health, we think of weight, we think of stress. We're used to kind of compartmentalizing the idea of our health. But in the ancient world, it's a much more cohesive picture. If one part of you is suffering, all parts of you are suffering. And so while these don't seem like spiritual problems, Jesus cures them as spiritual healing. And so now this man can hear, he can speak, and he may likely go on, though Mark doesn't tell us, to do evangelism. He is able to now add his voice to the stories about Jesus. And Jesus again says, don't tell anyone. And then Mark kind of dryly says, the more he ordered them, the more they proclaimed it zealously. They were astounded beyond measure, saying he has done everything well. And that's a great assessment of Jesus for Mark. I mean, those are Mark's words as much as they're the crowd's word.
Isn't it such a modern thing, Clint, that we might be tempted to get all worked up about, well, why did he touch his face?
Right.
What's the mechanism of healing here? That's such a Western idea, because if we kind of understood that, we would maybe be able to replicate it.
Well, I think I think we think of those things as the cure, and Mark thinks of Jesus as the cure.
Absolutely.
And there's a difference in that. I think that's a good insight.
Yeah, and we will miss for that what you've already said is the main point. It's the fact that this man's ears were open and his tongue was released, right? Whatever that symbolic act that Jesus did is significant, but what we shouldn't miss is the opening of ears and tongue enabled the proclamation that followed. He was able to add his voice to this great chorus of witnesses, and not even Jesus could stop him from doing it. Isn't that amazing? Just sit in that for a second. What things have you been released from in your life that have freed you to that same kind of free proclamation? All of us would do well to both survey our life, to see the places where God has done that work, and also then to be moved forward to share it with others. I think that is often where Christians get it wrong, is we believe that the healing that we pray for or the deliverance that we seek is somehow for ourselves. But what we miss, Clint, is that we are freed for the sake of serving and loving others to the glory of Christ. And that's exactly what happens in this story. This man, his tongue is loosed, and now he can proclaim the greatness of the one who healed him. So let's not get sort of fixated on the hows of this story, and instead let's focus on, I think, what Mark is trying to point us to, and it's the why. Why are we healed? Why does Christ deliver us? Why is the Messiah's astounding greatness so important? And the reason for that is because it transforms our lives and sends us out as witnesses to the same.
Yeah, and not to oversell this, but again, these are the things throughout the Old Testament, the language with which the Jews would be familiar, that what heralds the coming of the kingdom. The blind will see, the deaf will hear, the dumb will speak, the lame will walk. For Mark, he is ticking all the boxes of what it looks like when Jesus arrives, and Jesus is fulfilling all of those roles. And so Mark is making a not very subtle case, and doing it well. Yeah, I think this is a really great story. I think it is an interesting story, particularly if you sort of understand it to be coupled with the healing of the woman's daughter from yesterday. Again, a Gentile family. Jesus doesn't touch the child. Jesus doesn't even go to the child. Here he takes the man aside. She goes home to find it true. He experiences it in his own body. There's some interesting conversation, I think, that happens between the two stories.
Yeah, notice, do you remember the woman was able to speak back to Christ? She was able to retort back with, yeah, but even the dogs eat from the table. This man can't even speak. He doesn't come with the ability to demonstrate some sort of healing words. And that was a significant theme in the ancient world, was the idea of you being able to say the enchantment, or you being able to pray the particular prayer, because there was this sort of cause and effect kind of belief. And here Jesus, this isn't about that. It's not about any one person being able to trick or coax or somehow get Jesus to their side. When Jesus decides something, it's going to be that way. When Jesus heals, you're healed. There's not any, did you say the right prayer, or did you mean it the right amount, or no, that's not. Jesus is fully capable of healing by his own choice and volition. And, that may not seem like an incredibly important thing from our historical vantage, but I do think it was significant to the ancient church.
Absolutely. So we hope there's something in this story that speaks to you. We think it's pretty good. Tomorrow we kind of see Mark again, kind of bookend a section. We'll talk about that. It's a story that will be, it will be very familiar. We'll go through it probably quickly, but some interesting things that Mark does in including a story almost the exact same as what we've already seen, and telling it again, and we'll give you some thoughts on that. But thanks for being with us. Hope everybody is doing well, and hope whether it's warm, cold, snow, no snow, wherever you live, that you have a good day and you join us tomorrow.
Yeah, hang with us this week. It's going to be good. We'll see you soon. Thank you for joining us for this daily Bible study. If this is your first time, welcome. We are so glad that you have joined us for this time of intentional study of God's Word. You will find in the description of this video a link to our website. We would love to get to know who you are. We'd love to reach out and greet you personally, but be sure, whether or not this is your first time, to like this video. If you're on Facebook, share it so that other people might be able to find it too. If you're on YouTube, consider subscribing. You'll receive more content like this every day at 2 o'clock Central Standard Time. On top of that, every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we release a Pastor Talk podcast, which goes through different series, but all of them about faith and life and discipleship of Jesus Christ. Friends, regardless of how many times you've been with us, we hope that this day has been meaningful for you as you seek to follow Jesus Christ. So until next time, be blessed. We look forward to seeing you soon.